You are listening to Water Flying, a show dedicated to all things seaplanes. Brought to you by the Seaplane Pilots Association. My name is Steve McCoy. I'm the Executive Director of the Seaplane Pilots Association, which is the world's largest nonprofit advocacy organization dedicated to the protection and promotion of the water flying community. Climb aboard! We're about to start today's episode. Well, today we have a very special guest with us, joining us from down under, Mr. Dan Bolton, who is the host of the incredibly successful podcast On the Step. And I have to admit, he's actually the inspiration for this podcast. And of course, as always, I'm joined by my co-pilot, Abbie Kellett.
Great to be back, Steve. So I'm really pretty excited to be here. We have an awesome guest just putting out amazing content on his podcast. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. We're really big fans.
Thanks very much for having me, guys. It's awesome to inspire you to start your own seaplane podcast. Any seaplane podcast that we can have out there, as many as possible, is always good. So, yeah, thanks very much for having me on the show as one of your guests.
Oh, that's awesome. So you cover a lot of backstory on your podcast, but can you give us a little history of your journey and how you got started flying and how this all began?
Yeah, mate. So my history is, as you mentioned, well documented with a few interviews, including one of my own on my podcast. But basically got into flying through my family, through my dad, who flew seaplanes at his own company in Geelong, down in Victoria, where I grew up. And look, it was around when I was in kind of grade 9 or year 9, year 10, and I didn't really know where I wanted to go with my career. And he had this seaplane business running, and I thought, look, I might as well give this a crack. So when I finished year 12, I went and got my pilot's license, finished that in a year and a half, and then I wasn't going down the seaplane path straight away. I think my dad kind of pushed me down the aviation because that was around 2007 that I finished school. And at that stage, the airlines were really hiring quite a lot of pilots. Not that I was airline driven either. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do at 17, 18 years old. But once I finished my license, the GFC hit, and then there was really no pilot jobs. So I was stuck for about 6 months stacking shelves at Coles, which I'd been doing for the last 5 years to kind of pay for my training and everything, and a bit of in school time as well. But then Dad needed a bit of help over summer, so I went and got my flight endorsement and started working with him. And basically, I think being his son, he pushed me right in the deep end, and I basically did as much flying as possible over that summer. And then I think he got used to sitting back and relaxing while I did all the flying. So he kept me on for a year and a half until I eventually moved on and kind of made my own way through the seaplane aviation lifestyle and career-wise.
So wow, that's interesting. Yeah. So I come from my dad, having a not seaplane background, but he's aviation guy. He builds the old stuff up at Fantasy of Flight here in Florida. And it's just kind of interesting. I can feel that always being around aviation, but not necessarily, that being the only path for you. And so 17 years old, that's when I got my license, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it. And I knew that the airlines weren't the only option. And so it's interesting to see someone else who has found a route that, you obviously enjoy doing and you want to share with people.
And I'm jealous. Yeah, and because I didn't come from an aviation family.
You're the special one, Steve.
Yeah, I'm the special kid with the dunce cap on.
Oh. And you ended up in a Grumman Mallard. So how did that happen?
Well, yeah, we're very lucky here in Australia. I mean, after interviewing so many people from the States, I realise how lucky you guys are with all the seaplane activity you've got. But yeah, we can claim this one. We've got 3 commercially operated Grumman Mallard turboprops in Australia, which is very unique. The last 3 that are operating commercially in the world. So, and once again, this job, it's up in the top end of Darwin, top end of Australia here in Darwin. And look, it was always on the radar early on, but I think when you go through the seaplane pilot lifestyle for a while, single pilot, flying, I was flying in the Whitsundays for a while there, out to beaches and out to the reef and everything. And this job on the Mallard was more of an airliner style of job, 2 crew IFR, and you started off as a first officer. So I think it didn't initially kind of attract my attention a lot. To be honest, back in the day, my goal was to be a twin otter captain in the Maldives, and to get there, what I needed was an ATPL. So
you talk about that in your podcast.
It's really hard to get those night hours up as a seaplane pilot, So I actually left flying floats for a little bit there to get an IFR job to kind of start building some time in different areas, I guess. Never intending to go down the airline route again, but just trying to kind of broaden my experience. And, this job on the Mallard, it kind of ticked all the boxes for building those hours even further. And but once I got on there, I absolutely have just fallen in love with the aeroplane. It is one of the most incredible aircraft to fly. And I think the whole aspect as well is another incredible aspect that's so unique, flying a whole aircraft. And this machine is an absolute weapon. I've spoken about that a lot of times on the podcast, but it's an absolute handful on the water. And then you kind of delve into the history of the aircraft and how unique it is as well. It's just, as I mentioned, over the last kind of nearly 4 years now, I've just absolutely fallen in love with this aircraft. And it's been an incredible experience.
Yeah, so the Grumman brotherhood and sisterhood that we belong to. So I'm sure it's similar to the Albatross, and you kind of roll the yoke all the way over and then pull it with your forearm into your chest for takeoff, and then it's a balancing of the props and rolling out the yoke and the ailerons to come on step. Is that similar to the Albatross?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, but I think the biggest thing with the Mallard is the difference in payload or takeoff weight, I should say, with different payloads. So, for example, we can have 1.5 tons or 1.2 ton of payload there and take us up to our max takeoff weight of around 6.3 ton. And then you're doing exactly that, full right aileron, full stick back basically into your chest, and then full right rudder as well. And then you're leading with the left engine. So everything wants to go left really bad. Mm-hmm. Some of the aircraft do it more than others. And then you're basically setting the power. As a multi-crew, we kind of push the powers up to near about full takeoff power, and then the first officer, the pilot monitoring will then adjust those power settings to as a more of a fine adjustment, because obviously being in a seaplane, you could be in some quite rough water. So with your hands up above your head there, pushing the power forward with getting smashed with some waves as you start accelerating to get on the step, trying to set a really fine power setting with your head in the cockpit is really not what you want as a pilot flying. So we let the pilot monitoring just adjust the torques once we take over, and then it's the full wrestle just starts with trying to get this thing up and avoid porpoising, you know what I mean? So you're then releasing that aileron, releasing that rudder, and just playing with the elevator there to set an attitude that will stop the aircraft from porpoising and or avoid porpoising altogether. And then once you've kind of got it up around 60 knots there, you're pretty safe and you can get going. But as I mentioned, with that payload, we could be then empty with a light fuel load, and we're almost 2 tons different, and then it behaves completely differently again. With so much power of those PD6s, the thing just leaps up out of the water. And it's, you could be airborne in kind of 15 seconds versus say maybe 40 seconds. So it all happens a lot quicker. That it almost kind of just launches out of the water and almost falls back on like a bit of a whale coming out of the, doing a breach out of the water there. It's a bit of a handful, but, you get used to it over time, and, it's very rewarding and fun job.
Yeah, and so, that was the largest multi-engine seaplane I had flown before the Albatross was the Twin CB. And I think one of the greatest things that attracted me to the Albatross immediately was just how physical that process is of going from idle taxi to step taxi and takeoff. because it is a very physical, coordinated experience.
Yeah, it is. And it's a frustrating one as well when you're first learning, because, I'd come from a reasonable amount of experience in the, float plane world. I think I had about 2,500, 3,000 hours or something like that of float flying. And at that stage, I felt pretty confident on the water and pretty competent. And, one of the things I like to say, when I was working in Vietnam, I did a stint over there for 11 months, and I was doing a bit of training with some of the first officers who were local guys who were upgrading to command. And I just remember sitting in that right seat, and these guys would get up on the step in the EX caravan, and I knew exactly that I had to just move that control column like maybe half a centimetre back or forward just to hit the sweet spot on the steps. That's how much in your own mind you knew that aeroplane back to front. But when it came to the Mallard, it just, one day you got to take off from the right-hand seat, starting off as a first officer there. You'd do a takeoff and it would work out really well. And then the next day you'd do another one and it was you felt like it was exactly the same, but this thing would almost launch out of the air doing, these random porpoises everywhere. And you're just like, how the hell do I fix this? What am I doing differently that, last time compared to this time? And maybe it was the weight, maybe it was, the water conditions that affected it, because obviously we're also operating in open ocean as well. So some of the swell that we have to work with can be quite rough, and that can affect your process of getting it on the step as well. So yeah, it's super variable, but and one of the other factors for us with this operation as well is we don't do a lot of water work. So, our general mission is flying from Darwin out to the Pearl Farms, which are about anywhere from an hour and 50 to 2.5 hours away, one way. So, like I said before, it's a bit of an airliner style job. You're sitting up in the cruise and talking rubbish or listening to your favourite Seaplane podcast all the way to your destination there before landing on the water. And then also being multi-crew, you've got to share that time between you two. So one is pilot monitoring, one is pilot flying. So there's not a lot of water work, but that's one of the factors with trying to get your head around taming this beast.
Yeah, and there's a lot of crew resource, like you were saying, of handling off the throttles on takeoff and things like that, because the airplane is such a handful. And I think the big difference from flying floats is getting that sponson out of the water, and again, that physical side. So it's a little bit intimidating from going to floats to the flying boats, because there's more going on. There's a lot more going on.
Yeah, and you're sitting a lot lower in the water, which is very interesting as well. As you mentioned, keeping that lateral wings level through the step phase there is critical as well. I think the best analogy I can come up with is that, the float plane is like the car that has, 2 points of contact on the ground, whereas the flying boat is like the bicycle that has just the 1 point of contact. So you've got that balance issue as well. But yeah, overall, it's an absolute pleasure to be flying such a unique and incredible aircraft.
I really like that. The car versus the bike. I'm going to take that back to my students. So thank you.
A flying boat doesn't have training wheels like the float.
It's true.
No, exactly. Yeah, you can't throw the training wheels off.
Yanking the training wheels off.
Tell Ben that one, Abby.
Oh, I will, because he loves the metaphor. So I will absolutely tell. I'm writing that down now. So, car versus bicycle. So getting back to that podcast, you said you're listening to your favorite airplane podcast. I love that. So, you were the inspiration for the best Seaplane podcast. That's right. So you are inspiration for this podcast, bringing that love that you obviously have to the community, the aviation community. Where did the inspiration for your podcast come from?
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny story, I guess. I wasn't big into podcasts at all before I started this. I really hadn't listened to many at all. A mate of mine I play a lot of golf with up here in Darwin is a good mate. He got me onto some golf podcasts. And so our seasons up here, we go from in Darwin, we have a wet season and a dry season. So the wet season is our summer, so we get a lot of rain and it's very hot and humid. And then our dry season is our winter, but it's still very hot. It doesn't really kind of go cold here at any stage.
Right.
So our charter season for flying happens in our dry season, which we've just finished basically. So it would be your summer basically. So when COVID hit, this year, it was kind of at the end of our wet season, which is pretty slow for us as pilots. We're only just doing our regular pearling runs, which are really only gives you 1 or 2 days a week of flying. And then we lead into our charter season, which can ramp it up a little bit more. And we're actually really trying to push a lot of charter work. We're doing some safari stuff as well, like overnights in the Kimberley at some amazing camps using the Mallard. So we're actually allowing a lot more passengers who would not normally fly on the Mallard to go out there.
That's awesome.
But yeah, which is really exciting. But when COVID hit, that kind of just basically killed all of our charter season this year. So work was still pretty slow. And recently, in November last year, nearly a year ago, we had our first child, my wife and I, and I was just finding myself on standby days where I was walking him along the waterfront where I live. And I was just finding music was pretty boring. So I started listening to these golf podcasts. And then I was like, you know what, I should be listening to some aviation podcasts here, trying to learn some new stuff about aviation. You know, like I was trying to think about maybe I could do some study whilst I'm walking, because I think with music, your mind just kind of goes off into tangents and whatnot, and you kind of find yourself being a bit bored. So I started searching for aviation podcasts, and I found this great one, Pilot to Pilot. He's another American dude who does some great aviation podcasts out there, and he interviews people from all walks of aviation, which is really cool. But I found myself going through his list and just looking for the Seaplane interviews that he did. So, and I ended up getting in contact with him, and I actually did an interview for him on episode 104, which was the first time I'd been on a podcast. And then I was kind of like, you know what, I reckon I could do this. Like, I'd had a bit of experience making some YouTube stuff, just making long videos. I've always loved playing around with video editing, and I've used GarageBand a little bit, which is what I use my podcast to edit on, and I was just like, you know what, I think I could achieve this. So I basically just kind of knuckled down for a few days, wrote up a kind of bit of a plan of attack of how I'd do it, and went and looked online, researched, and got myself a mic and a few other little things that make it kind of a bit more easier to do these interviews, and lined up a few people and started from there. So, and really, I think because of COVID, I had a lot of extra time. So at the start there, I was just like, you know what, I can knock out 2 episodes a week for sure. I did that for a while there. And now I think with a kid that's 11 months old and starting to walk around, and you don't really get much time to do anything else other than look after him, and with a bit of work. And now my wife is also 7 months pregnant again. It's a bit harder to do the 2 a week, but then I think also I look at On the Step as a bit of a marathon, and I've kind of jumped out of the gates in the first kind of couple of kilometres or miles, as you folks speak over there, and I've really sprinted pretty hard, and I don't want to burn myself out. No, I'm in this for the long run, and
of course,
I want to produce some really good content over a long period of time. So I think the 1 a week is gonna do that. But yeah, I'm really excited about the whole show, and like I said, I mentioned this to you guys before we started this episode. I look at how many episodes I've got out there now and what kind of content it covers, and I'm just like, how the hell did that happen? Like, this was a dream 6 months ago, and here it is with all these episodes. So yeah, it's been good fun.
You're knocking it out of the park, and I'm just laughing here as we sit here, because I'm like, this sounds like a pyramid scheme. You listen to your first podcast, you get inspired to do it. You appear on a podcast, then you start your own. I appear on your podcast, you inspire me, and here we are talking to each other on this podcast. It's spreading. It's like a disease.
And for only $9.99 a month, Steve, you can make your own podcast happen.
That's awesome. So to add fuel to the fire, I guess here, we're literally sitting here, and I'm getting texted by a good friend of ours, Kevin Oakes, who's the Southeast distributor for Aviat Husky. And he's a real passionate member, and he actually was working at Progressive Aerodyne and engineered us getting the Progressive Aerodyne Sea Ray that we flew for 2 years. But he just texted me as we're talking, and he says, "Hi, Steve, Kevin Oakes from Aviat Husky. I hope all is well with you. Just wanted to let you know I've been listening to the new podcast. I'm so glad you guys did this. I've been listening to On the Step for quite some time. Well done. Glad I can add SBA to the list. So thank you, Daniel.
That's very cool. And I love stories like that. You know, I had a guy the other day who was flight training in Alaska, and he sent me a message saying, "Oh, look, you know, I've been loving the show. I got told about it by one of the instructors over here, and, you know, I wanted to suggest a guest for the future and blah, blah, blah." And I was just like, "That's so cool that there's some guy who's teaching in Alaska, and he's got a new student who comes in and he goes, 'Hey, here's some podcasts you should listen to all about flying seaplanes.'" I'm like, that's pretty neat.
Oh, that's awesome. So I just think it's cool. So when Abby and I started talking about her coming on board at SBA, I said, "I've got this idea. I want to start a podcast." She goes, "Have you heard that guy, that Mallard guy? He's on fire. Everyone I know is listening to Daniel."
You were hot topic around Jack Brown's. So
what do you mean were, Abby?
oh man. I would like to dial back a little bit. So you still are. You are the talk of the town here.
So aside from the podcast, you're really, I know, active on Instagram, which is where Kevin picked us up with our podcast. You've been doing some YouTube stuff, Facebook, social media in general. So we're so thankful for all the images and videos that you're putting out there. But what makes you want to bring all of this knowledge to the aviation community? I mean, you appeared on a podcast, you like the format, but what's the grand driver?
I think it's just my passion for flying seaplanes, to be honest. I love hearing seaplane stories, and I love sharing them as well. And I just think that the seaplane world is just so unique. You know, we spoke about it before, Abby, there, where, you know, you didn't have to go down the airline route, but then you can't even look at seaplanes as just one route as well. Like, there's so many branches in the seaplane industry as well, you know, like whether it be Fireboss or instructing, or, you know, like the IFR flying that I do on a Mallard, or there's some stuff in Asia that you can be on a caravan flying multi-crew IFR, or, you know, there's a Goose, you know, over in Canada there that's still operating commercially. You know, and then I looked at other aspects of it as well, like how floats are built. You know, I spoke with both Whip Air and PK floats and talked about that. I did a bit of stuff on engineering wise with seaplanes. So yeah, I think there's, and probably also the adventure side of it as well. I think, you know, I interviewed Michael Smith, who's an Australian guy who became the first ever pilot to fly around the world in a single engine seaplane, which was about 4 or 5 years ago in a Sea Ray. Wow. And, you know, wow. he just recently bought one of the Sea Bear aircraft out of Russia for his own personal use back in here in Melbourne. And yeah, he retraced the steps of the Vickers Vimy Great Air Race flight from, I think it was from London back to Australia, which actually came through Darwin. It finished in Darwin, which is pretty cool because we don't get to see a lot of stuff here in Darwin. But, you know, I interviewed him about that aircraft as well. Yeah, I think in the end it's just the stories. You know, I could interview a seaplane pilot 100 times and everyone's story is different and still quite interesting, I think. So, and one of the things that have come out of it, I think, because of creating this content is I'm focusing a lot on safety messages as well. The gear down water landing is a real big passion of mine, that it shouldn't happen at all.
Yes.
So I've done a couple of episodes on that. I did one that was a presentation that I presented to the Seaplane Pilots Association of Australia last year. It was a PowerPoint, so I had to kind of modify it a little bit for a podcast, but I think I still got the message through on that one, and that was a very popular episode as well. And then I recently interviewed 2 pilots who had actually been in seaplane gear down water landing accidents, including one who was the pilot who ended my dad's business. He was the one who landed my dad's seaplane gear down in front of his own eyes. And look, you know, that was I think that was incredible that he was happy to come on board. There was never any you know, I don't want to use the word hate, but there was never any of that behind it. It was an accident that happens, but it was very incredible for him to come on and share his experience so that it hopefully would stop others doing it in the future. So that was incredible as well. So yeah, I think there's some good safety messages there as well that people can get out. But yeah, I hope everyone's just enjoying it and kind of listening to different aspects in the seaplane industry.
Yeah, you know how I feel about safety and gear down. So we've had that discussion, and I'm sure it's not the last time we'll have that discussion. So I look forward to doing more about that.
And, you know, you've had such a wide variety of these interviewees. So it's so interesting that you say this, because it's actually my next question here. Because, you know, the biggest question we get at the SPA, and even, you know, when I'm flying with students and they do this amazing flying, they have so much fun and their face just falls because they know, or they think, like, I'm never going to be able to do this again. I'm never going to be able to fly a seaplane again. And, you know, what you're doing is essentially answering that question through your podcast. You know, look at what these people are doing. Look at the careers they have. This is possible. So what would you tell a pilot? You know, I know you're telling them through the podcast, but directly, what would you tell a pilot interested in seaplane flying but unsure of where to take that interest?
Yeah, I think just go and explore the different avenues that there are. I mean, obviously, you guys in the States have just got such a variety of different operators that you can go and you know, check out anywhere from, you know, Alaska to Florida. There's just, I mean, just that in its own self is just two different worlds of seaplane flying. You know, high mountain terrain and weather, and cold versus tropical, and flat, I imagine, down in Florida and along the Bahamas there. You know, they're just two different worlds themselves. So, yeah, I mean, if they're really interested in getting to the seaplane career, I think really do some investigating in what kind of paths you can go down just in that career alone. You know, these days with social media, with the internet and everything, the world is so much smaller, and people can do a lot of research online to find out what paths they want to go down relatively easily. So, yeah, but don't give up as well, and don't think that just because you've done your float plane endorsement and you've finished it and you're waving goodbye to Abbie at the door of Jack Brown's that it's all the end. You know, I think it's incredible what Tropic Ocean Airways are doing there at the moment, and I'm sure they're not the only one, but I spoke to a few people from there about the ability that they can now employ 250-hour seaplane-rated pilots to come in and be right-hand seat of a caravan on floats. I think that's an incredible step going forward to building seaplane pilots, really in America, but probably worldwide. Hopefully, there are some other companies that follow suit with that. Obviously, it's all work dependent as well. You can't just throw a caravan on floats and multi-crew it when there's only work for a 182 or something like that. But
right.
Yeah, I think that's one thing in Australia that we're lacking at the moment. We don't have those jobs that people can kind of come into with really low hours. And so it does make it really hard to kind of get that break in the industry sometimes. But yeah, I think it's those people who are so passionate and really want to follow their dreams, and they're the ones who work hard enough to make it happen.
So it's interesting that you say that. You know, it really is just a little bit of creativity. I can't say that, you know, anyone has really held my hand as I go through my journey in aviation, so much as, you know, you go to a 141 and you are going to fly for this regional for this amount of time, and you pretty much have it planned out, which I suppose is very, very nice for some people, you know, the security of it. Otherwise, you know, if you want to get into seaplane flying, you have to get a little creative. Talk
Absolutely.
to people, you know, listen to podcasts.
Yeah. And what I tell people is, you know, people are like, well, how do I get engaged in this? How do I make this happen? How do I get a seaplane job? Well, the biggest thing is get involved in the community in the first place. Insert yourself into the community.
Yeah. And you talk about creativity, Abbie. One of my favourite episodes of On the Step is with Shane McCauley, who was also the guest host when I did my own kind of interview through the podcast. He's a New Zealander. He was actually flying at Air New Zealand in the airlines. He'd been flying for 20 odd years, and he wanted to get into floats. He wanted to take some time away from airline flying and become a float plane pilot and go back to being, you know, bush at heart, because he really is a bush pilot at heart. His parents own a Cub and a 185 on wheels in Wanaka in New Zealand, which is an incredible place. But to get a float plane endorsement, he spoke with a guy in the North Island who had a cub on floats, and the guy wasn't really interested in doing an endorsement unless he bought it. So he literally said, "Yep, I'll buy it." Took an extra loan out on the home loan, bought this cub on floats in the North Island, and then flew it down to his home and just found a place at a caravan park to keep this thing on a trailer, and literally built up like 150 hours of float plane flying just on his own, basically learning the ropes, so that he could apply for jobs in Canada, and he ended up doing a couple of seasons at Tyax Adventures in Canada, and also a bit of a stint in the Maldives 6 months before COVID. So talk about creativity. I know we don't all have a bit of cash and around to buy our own airplane just to build ours, but that's the kind of effort he went into just to be able to say that he'd been a float plane for a couple of seasons. So
and he's very
creativity is
fortunate with the
definitely one
money.
thing.
Yeah, but just the dedication you have to make that happen for yourself. I mean, the money is wonderful, what you have, what you can do, but I got into the right seat of a caravan with 10 hours of seaplane time and just a little bit of luck. So
yeah, I think that's
story.
Unbelievable. I mean, because my experience was you always had to have 1,500 hours. You had to have at least 500 hours of seaplane time. And then Abby's telling me this story, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah, exactly.
I snuck in.
She snuck in under the radar.
No, but I think that's great that they're doing that, and you can start to build time in the right-hand seat and learn from other experienced pilots. Because Steve, you'd know as well. Once you step in that float plane for the first time, that's when the learning starts. It doesn't all happen in the Jack Brown's there or other. I shouldn't keep saying Jack Brown's because I know that you're a seaplane wide, yeah, it's a license to learn. So you go out there and you have to start learning how to fly, all these different areas and learning the wonderful world of floats by yourself. So, what Abbie would have gone down to sit in the right-hand seat there and learn from these experienced pilots. Geez, I wish I had that when I started as well, Yeah.
You learn so much from people. I mean, asking questions like what you're learning in your podcast, I'm sure it's just opening your eyes to a completely whole world of seaplane flying.
Yeah, it is. It's, interviewing so many different people, and it really gets the juices flowing and makes me want to do all these random different things in the seaplane world that I never thought I would. And it was cool to hear my latest episode, number 35, with Edda Navasarada, who's a fire boss pilot in Sweden, Spanish guy. He got in contact with me, and this guy's a chief pilot of a Swedish firebombing company, and he's telling me that he's learning stuff from my podcast. Like, that's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
From the stories, the stories that are shared through the podcast there. So, it's really cool to hear feedback like that.
Yeah, it's really cool. So what do we have to expect in the future from your podcast?
Mate, I've got so much content that I can get out there. It's one of the things, as I mentioned before, when I started off at 2 episodes a week, it was just because there was so many cool people to talk to and so many cool stories to get out there. And I was like a kid in a candy shop. I was just like, I want that one, and I want to put this one out, and I need people to listen to this guy as well, and I need to interview this guy. It was just like, how do I slow down? You know what I mean? So
Pace yourself.
I've literally got a list of 50 people that I want to get in contact with.
Wow.
And that's a year's worth of podcasting, and the list just keeps growing and growing. So. And I keep
become
getting
a podcast addict.
Yeah, I have exactly. But I've recorded. I think I've got 4 episodes in the bank at the moment. I like to say that. So I like to have a few there so that maybe I can have a couple of date nights with the wife or something like that. You know what I mean? And then not have to stress too much about podcasting. Keeps her happy as well. But next episode, I'm not sure when you're exactly going to release this one, so it might already be out by now. But I'm really excited about this one. I'm talking with a really popular Instagrammer known as Cessna Tour, T-E-U-R, and he puts so much effort into creating these posts about the most interesting, not just seaplanes, but aircraft in general. and if you ever see a Cessna tour post, there is just, a solid hour's worth of work of just doing research to be able to create this long post with a backstory on these aircraft. So I've got him to come on board, and he's given me a list of his 10 most unique seaplanes that have ever flown. And I must say the list is really cool. It's a really fun episode. I've got another conversation with another Fireboss pilot here in Australia, talking a lot about the lifestyle of a firebombing pilot, and there's a bit of ag content in there as well, which is quite interesting. I think most of the seaplane pilots out there would be interested in the ag lifestyle and a bit of ag flying.
I'm very interested, cool to have that so I can vouch for that.
Yeah, it's just some of the stories. I mean, I like to keep everything seaplane orientated, but sometimes you have to kind of go off the tangent there as well a little bit to hear someone's background, and some of the stories are incredible. A good example of that is Rob Ceravolo. How can you not interview that guy and not talk about, or how can you interview that guy and not talk about Top Gun? You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I'm going to be asking him about carrier landings and everything, and then we'll finish with about a 5-minute seaplane talk, because I'm interested in all the other stuff as well. But so yeah, that's cool. A bit of ag kind of introduced into the show a little bit. And a couple of boys on Instagram who run a page called Best of Both Aviation. So only speaking to them.
Okay, yeah.
Basically their concept is that one guy's followed the airline route, one guy's followed the float route, and so they're putting out a page that's basically the best of both. So they kind of put up photos to share both of their kind of career paths. So that's a cool one as well. And then, as I mentioned, from there on, it's just a list of super interesting, incredible people within our amazing industry.
Oh, that's awesome. So in 5.5 months, 35 episodes, 20,000 plus listeners so far. An amazing job. If you guys are not listening to On Step, That Mallard Guy, then you must. And Daniel, I really want to thank you for joining us. I know it's very early over there in the morning, and I really appreciate you getting up and sharing some time with us. And thank you. I look forward to more.
Yeah, no worries, Steve. I know that you came on the show and you had to get up very early for my conversation, so a little bit of payback. But no, it's been awesome, and well done on creating this, podcast as well. It's going to be great to work with you guys and to hear more of the content that you're getting out as well. So, yeah, congratulations.
I look forward to having you back on soon.
Sounds good.
We are so glad you joined us today. If you like today's show, I highly encourage you to join the Seaplane Pilots Association and become a member of the largest seaplane community in the world. Members receive Water Flying, the only full-color glossy magazine dedicated to the seaplane community. And it's available in both printed and digital form. Your membership also includes access to the Water Landing Directory app, which has the Seaplane Flight School Directory and a calendar of seaplane events not only here in the United States, but around the world. The association hosts regular educational workshops, safety seminars, and gatherings for seaplane pilots and anyone with a passion for seaplanes. So look us up online at seaplanes.org, join our community, and support our mission of protecting and promoting water flying.